If you're watching this video, you've probably seen Revenge of the Sith, and you may remember the part where Palpatine starts acting real shifty, telling Anakin about this weird Sith Lord, Darth Plagueis the Wise.
Did you ever hear the tragedy of Darth Plagueis the Wise?
Well, this is the book about that. The book has a bit more drama than your average Star Wars book. The novel started production at some point in 2006 for a 2008 release, with the book originally following Qui-Gon's backstory on how he was able to become a Force ghost, along with Darth Plagueis' journey to discover immortality. However, this book was put on hold since it was in a tumultuous period in the Star Wars continuity, following the Star Wars prequel trilogy and the franchise as a whole asking, what's next? Was George going to do more films? Was there going to be TV shows? Was it going to just be books again? Anyways, the book would be replaced on the schedule with Darth Bane, The Rule of Two, which we previously covered, while James Luceno indicated that he still wanted to write the book once Lucasfilm allowed him to do it. After years on ice, the project was announced to be in the works once again, with a higher emphasis on Plagueis and Palpatine, and largely cutting out the Qui-Gon Jinn subplot that was initially planned for the novel. The book itself being a replacement for a planned sequel to the Imperial Commandos book, a sequel itself to the Republic Commandos publishing line. In terms of how it was told, James Luceno took the general first-person recount plot structure from Interview with a Vampire, which would go on to be a big film at one point. Regardless, though, the novel starts on the end, fresh after Palpatine kills his master Darth Plagueis to set up an establishment on the story Palpatine told Anakin in the opera during Revenge of the Sith, then goes back in time to the start of the story at 67 BBY, when Darth Plagueis is with his master, Darth Tenebrous, a Sith far removed from the original Rule of Two designs by Darth Bane. With that ideal growing weaker, Tenebrous was more cautious and making less trouble than he once had for the establishment of the galaxy. Anyhow, Plagueis and Tenebrous are on the planet Baldemic, where Plagueis decides the time has come to kill his master. After stumbling upon a pocket of cortosis, a saber-resistant material, the deposit becomes unstable after Plagueis meddles with it, causing an explosion that kills Tenebrous. During his dying moments, Plagueis basically calls the Sith a coward and mentions that he did it on purpose. Plagueis also confides in his master that the Rule of Two is flawed, and much like Bane himself, he plans to dismantle the old Sith system and creating it up again to his liking. During the ensuing destruction, though, Plagueis' ship was destroyed, so the Sith stows away. When at the local city, he runs into a ship that he can hide in. The crew eventually discover him, and they plan to turn him over to the police, but Plagueis kills them and takes their ship and their droid 114D, who joins Plagueis as its new master. Plagueis sets off back to his homeworld of Menace, where he is known as the rich banker Hugo Damask, the leader of the banking clan Damask Holdings. He has a meeting with investors, both above and below the board, including Gardala the Hutt, a Hutt rival to Jabba who wants full control of Tatooine, with the Damask Corporation becoming part of the pod racing racket and assisting in some illegal operations there. More politics ensue, though eventually, after some doing, Plagueis learns of a major plasma vein on Naboo, a peaceful planet behind most planets in a technical aspect that wound up with lots of important plasma caches that remained pretty much undiscovered up to this point. Soon after this, though, Plagueis learns an intruder is on his grounds, and he finds the culprit, a secret apprentice to Tenebrous, Darth Venamis, a Bith, like Tenebrous, that he found as a possible replacement to Plagueis, since Tenebrous was starting to fear that Plagueis had started to grow weak. So Plagueis battles the underexperienced Sith, capturing him after easily defeating him and realizing that Venamis is powerful in the Force, meaning that Plagueis can have a lab rat to experiment on, as he hopes to conquer death through the manipulation of midichlorians. Plagueis also gets a list of possible Force users that are unaffiliated to the Sith off of Venamis, realizing he could use the list to track a worthy apprentice, while killing those he deems unworthy to potentially create less enemies. He meets a seduced shapeshifter and eventually learns he is shapeshifting to steal from casinos, tracking the money to Kurd Santh Jr., the son of a man he killed long ago. He ultimately spares the shapeshifter, knowing he would never grow in power as a Sith, but he tracks the next person, a Force prophet who is perfectly predicting the Clone Wars and a future secret dictator, and Plagueis ends up killing her. The final person he meets is not Lar, though this apprentice had potential, being chosen by Darth Venamis to be his apprentice, tracking Jedi while his master was off-world. Plagueis tells Nott to prove himself by killing a Jedi, but Nott is killed in the process, so with all this, Plagueis is in a pickle. He can't find a suitable apprentice, so he heads off to Naboo to work on some political stuff while he tries to figure this out, which is when he meets a young Palpatine, kind of a quaint guy, but with lots of hate and an obvious affinity for the Force. Palpatine wants to get into politics, as many in Naboo are trying, but his outspoken hate for the rising politics of the planet have him angry, eventually leading him to be sent off by his family, though before they can do this, he kills them all and tells Plagueis, who congratulates Palpatine and promotes him to Darth Sidious. 11 years following the events on Naboo that led to Plagueis getting his new apprentice, the duo start unfolding their Sith plans. Plagueis is still a high-ranking businessman, and Sidious has started moving up in politics on Naboo, along with becoming a powerful Sith apprentice. After some doing, Palpatine has his open political mentor, Vidar Kim, assassinated, with him taking Kim's role as the Senator of Naboo. Plagueis, meanwhile, heads to Kamino to meet with cloners, still looking for a way to extend his life and become an indefinite leader of the Sith. Palpatine, however, grows frustrated with Plagueis, as while his political career continues to thrive, his Sith career is being held back by his master, so Palpatine heads to Dathomir in hopes to learn more about the Sith, where he meets the mother of two sons, one of whom is said to be sacrificed. Palpatine agrees to take the boy off the Night Sister and gives the boy the title Maul, hoping to train him as an assassin for he and Plagueis one day, or, if he's powerful enough, take him on as an apprentice. Palpatine puts him on Mustafar to start his Sith and assassin training, and Plagueis summons Palpatine to help him kill his political opposition, leading him to a confrontation that ended up being a trap, though Plagueis survives. He is critically wounded, forced to wear a transpirator device to survive from there on out. A further 20 years later, in 34 BBY, showing the events of the Phantom Menace from Palpatine and Plagueis' perspective, along with some moments like Padme becoming the young queen of Naboo, along with the manipulation of Jedi Master Sifo Dyas into creating the clone army on Naboo. Palpatine learns of Anakin, who he deduces may have been born to the Force due to experiments done by Plagueis and himself in the past, and most relevantly to this book, Chancellor Valorum is ousted, making Palpatine, with all his political accomplishments, the heir to the Chancellorship, with Plagueis' plan to see Palpatine appoint him as the co-chancellor, something that may have happened if not for Palpatine, who invites his master over in the twilight hours of the Battle of Naboo. Plagueis lets his guard down in his suite, with Palpatine drugging his Sith master. Plagueis wakes up weakened, then Palpatine starts shocking him to death. Plagueis doesn't fight back, thinking he may perhaps be immortal, though Palpatine basically mercilessly kills his master and says that he's a weak loser, pretty much. Following this, the novel ends with Palpatine pondering the future and wondering about what happened to Darth Tenebrous and whether or not his death was similar to Plagueis, as he feels Plagueis' place in the dark side began to consume him completely, the way it had Tenebrous. As this book is a drama about chasing Sith Lords, training Sith Lords, and Sith Lords, let's look at the many Sith Lords of this novel. Darth Plagueis is the next in line of many Sith Lords. After killing his master Darth Tenebrous, Plagueis starts toppling the dominoes to finally see the Sith resurgence since its fall into obscurity during the Darth Bane era at the end of the Old Republic. He was an affluent socialite and businessman with ties to the banking clans, Techno Union, and everyone else who would start falling into line to create the Separatist Alliance, allowing him to slowly and subtly push the tide of the corporate sector in the Republic. Eventually, after a fairly extensive search, Plagueis finds Palpatine, a boy from a politically connected family, with adequate anger, which he could use to potentially be lobbied and pulled up in the Senate across decades. Between his political connections and Plagueis' corporate ones, they really could cause damage to the galaxy. All the while, it seems some Jedi like Count Dooku and Master Sifo-Dyas are growing paranoid and starting to consider leaving the Jedi or creating an army. Plagueis also becomes obsessed with immortality, knowing that he has been the most successful Sith pretty much since the Old Republic. While Bane redefined the Order, he never took meaningful stances at destroying the Jedi or the Republic on a large scale the way he and Palpatine had. This would, of course, lead to his fall at the hands of Palpatine, who saw him as no longer needed and, if anything, kind of a liability, as Plagueis wanted to have Palpatine name him co-chancellor, which would not be super subtle. He eventually gets too consumed with power and wants to drop the veil, something Palpatine knows was very preemptive at the time of this novel. Palpatine, as I said, is seen sort of through the years, starting as a teen on Naboo who's very political and confides in Plagueis that he thinks he could wield power better than others, this along with clear anger and a connection to the Force. He is trained by Plagueis and becomes Sidious. Along his journey, he becomes more politically connected, gains trust within the ranks of the Jedi Order, and eventually gets Chancellor Valorum kicked from his seat, which gets him a chance at the gig. The book itself shows Palpatine's angle on the Phantom Menace, and we see him grow an interest in Anakin along with him finding Darth Maul. I also found it was kind of fascinating to watch his sort of two halves. You have the light, calm Palpatine and the dark, evil Sidious. It was kind of cool. Darth Maul is an uncontrollable assassin. It's implied Palpatine knows he will never grow past a weapon, but as part of his plan, he needs him to make it out and start fighting Jedi so that he can gain emergency powers. After this, Palpatine starts realizing Dooku could be a true potential Sith partner following the death of Plagueis and eventually the death of Maul. Darth Tenebrous dies early on and is the master of Plagueis. The thing about Tenebrous is he goes past his prime, and by the time we meet the character, he has been the Sith Lord for well over a century. A good run, but a run that started getting watered down with the decades, leading to Plagueis killing him to start making changes within the Sith Order. Ironically, Plagueis, by the rise of Palpatine, is also losing track of the ultimate Sith objective, leading to his death at the hands of his apprentice, much the way he had done Tenebrous. Tenebrous isn't super important, but is important foreshadowing, since Plagueis' death largely calls back to his master's killing. Darth Venamis was Tenebrous' backup in the event he was killed, also seeing that Plagueis seemed stagnant as an apprentice, as Plagueis would work under Tenebrous for decades. Following Tenebrous' death, though, Venamis confronts Plagueis, but was not worthy by any means, though Plagueis uses Venamis in midichlorian experiments for decades following his defeat, leaving the Sith alive but in a deep coma, noting that Venamis was quite powerful in the Force himself, but just didn't know how to harness it the way he could. Tonally, this book is pretty dark, but mostly just a political drama. It's about how the Sith transitioned from basically a niche cult, watered down by years and years of Sith just a tad too weak to actually make big moves. It shows how Plagueis and ultimately his death was utterly essential to making that change and kind of the catalyst to the Sith's rise within the Republic. Things like Plagueis' death is dark, but even subjects like the political assassinations and the stuff portrayed in this book were never super dark and graphic in the way the Darth Bane trilogy could occasionally be. It's all a means to the ends to explain basically galactic politics. The prose were really well done in this book. It's descriptive and a deep explanation of what was happening. It had a lot of ground to cover, and you could always get a clear mental image of what the story's setting and characters look like. The action is intense. It was in the Bane books too, but this is more matter of fact than some of the books. In part, I think this is due to how Plagueis as a character is. He's stiff, long, and calculating. He's not really a brutalist like the hateful Bane or Sidious either, making the vibe of battles very different when coming from Plagueis' perspective. I love how this book makes Kid Palpatine seem so quaint, but then he snaps and he has a dark side. Overall, this book is really cool. It makes Plagueis a more important character to the Star Wars universe than just a line in one of the films, who was one step away from greatness but just got a little too obsessed with it and ultimately lost everything as a result. We also see so many characters and what they were doing. Who was Sifo-Dyas, the guy who made the clones as mentioned in episode 2? Well, he was a Jedi who feared a war was lingering, and the rest of the Jedi thought he was crazy for it. Dooku is losing faith in the Jedi, Qui-Gon finds Anakin and is starting to grow alienated with Sifo-Dyas and Dooku, Maul is found on Dathomir. This is the prequel's prequel. It sets up everything and puts it in place to explain why the galaxy is about to see its first major shake-up in 1,000 years, a destabilization that the galaxy would never fully recover from, or at least what we see in the Legends continuity since it was eventually cancelled and replaced with the canon continuity. It's also so good and definitely worth a read for fans of the political side of the prequels. It adds so much needed context, and it has time to take the politics up a notch and go from boring to here. They're just an important and interesting aspect of the book, and they're really fleshed out with lots of explanation on why people do what they do and how it impacts the galaxy as a whole. This book would definitely add some popularity to the Plagueis character and expand his backstory behind the short glimpse we got in Revenge of the Sith. It has since been put out by the Essential Legends collection, and while it's not canon anymore, it has a really well done audiobook, and it's just a really good read if you want to check it out. I would say this one's definitely worth reading.